U.S. troops will remain in Iraq regardless of who wins in November. Indeed, if you look at their actual proposals, Senators Clinton and Obama have said we must keep troops in Iraq for counterterrorism operations, for force protection, and training Iraq soldiers, so-called Iraqification. The journal notes that, quote, conducting such missions would require the sustained development of tens of thousands of American military personnel, foreign policy advisors from both campaigns acknowledge. This is a perfect example of the circular logic of occupation. If there were no U.S. troops and no U.S. military bases in Iraq, and if the United States were not building in Baghdad the largest U.S. embassy or largest embassy of any government in the world in history, and if you didn't have the presence of more than 150,000 U.S. contractors in Iraq, you wouldn't need other troops for force protection. Counterterrorism, of course, is the same rationale that President Bush offers for why troops must stay. And training is the same discredited argument of Bush. As the Iraqis stand up, we will stand down. In addition, Senators Clinton and Obama have both talked about increasing overall U.S. troop levels by tens of thousands and adding more troops to the occupation of Afghanistan, including some of the troops that may potentially be redeployed from Iraq. One top aide to the Obama campaign, interviewed recently by journalist Jeremy Scahill, writing in The Nation magazine, even left open the possibility that if elected president, Obama would rely on greater numbers of mercenaries from companies such as Blackwater, Triple Canopy, and DynCorp in Iraq to replace troops redeployed to other theaters. And it's important to acknowledge that because that means that the work that Iraq Veterans Against War is doing, the work that people are organizing this weekend, is so important and has to continue no matter who is in office in 2009. The reason that the Democrats aren't providing an alternative, the reason that they've continued to fund the war in Congress after saying that they oppose the war, and in many cases being elected on the basis of that position, is that the geopolitical stakes for the United States are so high. Neither party, neither the Republicans or the Democrats, wants to preside over a defeat of the United States in Afghanistan or Iraq and manage the consequences that would follow. To understand why, we can dispense with all the public relations reasons for these wars: WMD, Al-Qaeda, liberating people living in tyrannical regimes, none of which hold up to scrutiny, and should instead look at the geopolitical interests driving both occupations. And here I want to make 5 brief points. First, Afghanistan and Iraq were meant to have a demonstration effect, signaling to other states around the world that the U.S. government has the right, which it will on a limited basis extend to allies such as Israel, to engage in preemptive strikes against any country it chooses, that it will defer to the United Nations and other international bodies only when it suits its ends, and will dismiss them as irrelevant otherwise, and that it will allow no challenge to the credibility of U.S. imperialism. As one unnamed hawk quoted in the New York Times put it, by setting up our military in Iraq, we can set an example to other countries. We can set an example to other countries. If you cooperate with terrorists or menace us in any way, or even look at us cross-eyed, this could happen to you. Second, the invasions were intended to give the United States greater control over the Middle East and Central and Western Asia, home to the vast majority of the world's oil reserves, most of the world's natural gas reserves, and also home to vital pipelines and shipping routes for energy. In the words of former Bush speechwriter David Frum, an American-led overthrow of Saddam Hussein and the replacement of the radical Ba'athist dictatorship with a new government more closely aligned with the United States would put America more wholly in charge of the region than any power since the Ottomans, or maybe even the Romans. That was the objective. The United States' interest in Middle Eastern and Asian energy is not primarily motivated by consumption needs, but motivated by geopolitical advantages that flow from controlling this oil and natural gas. U.S. policy planners understand that the main power centers that could emerge as peer rivals to the United States in the future and that could threaten its status as the world's sole superpower, namely India and China, the combined countries of the European Union, all are more reliant on energy imports from the Middle East than is the United States. Regional hegemony, therefore, gives the United States tremendous leverage and influence vis-à-vis competing economic and military powers that are dependent on these energy resources. As oil gets more expensive to extract, and as exploration is forced to seek out more dangerous geographic and political terrain for new oil finds, control over these energy resources and trade routes has grown more important to U.S. imperial strategy than even before, and it's always been an central axiom of U.S. foreign policy in the past several decades. Third, the plan for a quick and easy victory and regime change in both Afghanistan and Iraq was meant to establish client states in these two strategically located countries and provide the United States with important bases for military personnel and equipment, and also bases for projection of U.S. power, particularly to isolate and engineer regime change, ideally, in nearby Iran and Syria. These regional bases of power were also intended to enhance the ability of the United States to project power globally. That is, Washington hoped to use regional hegemony to preserve and expand its global hegemony, and to enhance its ability to intervene economically and politically in the affairs of any country around the world where the U.S. has interests, using U.S. military might to bully countries into compliance with its political and its economic program. Of course, this has backfired. Instead of being in a stronger position, the United States is in a weaker position regionally and internationally. But in many ways, this has only further raised the stakes. In particular, Iran has emerged as a more powerful regional player as a result of U.S. actions in both Afghanistan and Iraq. And we see, as a result, greater threats of an attack on Iran, particularly an aerial attack on Iran's nuclear facilities, or alleged nuclear facilities, which are also intended to facilitate regime change in that country. Meanwhile, Venezuela and Russia have also started to develop new energy relationships with Iran and other countries to develop independent trade relations and energy supply routes that threaten U.S. control and domination of energy markets. And keep in mind that Venezuela is a leading supplier of oil to the United States, and that Russia has the world's largest supply of natural gas reserves. Fourth, both occupations were linked to a set of economic objectives that extend far beyond the question of the huge subsidies and profits created for political allies in the national security, military, industrial complex, and extend to the much bigger prize of imposing a neoliberal model throughout all the Middle East and Western and Central Asia that would give the United States privileged access to these markets and open them to much greater foreign ownership and control. Fifth, the Bush administration thought that by its invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan, it could bury once and for all the so-called Vietnam syndrome, eliminating the public's reluctance to see Washington intervene militarily in the affairs of other countries and undermining international opposition to U.S. unilateralism. In other words, they wanted to overcome the defeat that the brave veterans from Vietnam and VVAW and the other groups that organized against that war achieved in defeating the United States in Vietnam, and the legacy, the very important legacy they created. And that's very important to acknowledge. And that's why they're holding on so tenaciously to the occupations of Iraq and Afghanistan to salvage some other outcome, no matter what the human cost. These were the real objectives that drove the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq, and that explain why the United States is continuing both occupations, despite all the harm they have caused to the Iraqi people, to the people of Afghanistan, to the people of the region, and to the U.S. troops being asked to wage these unjust and illegal wars. The truth is, the architects of both occupations have contempt for the people of Iraq and Afghanistan that they claim to have liberated, and they have contempt for the very troops they claim so loudly to support. The best way we can support the troops in reality is to bring them home now, not in 16 months or in 16 years, and to provide them the social, economic, medical, and psychological assistance that they need and deserve. Genuine support, not bumper sticker slogans and empty rhetoric. And the best way we can support the people of Afghanistan and Iraq is to withdraw from their countries immediately and unconditionally and pay reparations for the enormous harm and destruction that we have caused, opening the possibility for the genuine humanitarian assistance, reconstruction, and self-determination these countries desperately need. We cannot count on our elected or unelected officials to realize their folly and end the occupation of Iraq and Afghanistan and the imperial project of which they are a component part. Only pressure of a movement that centrally includes soldiers, veterans, and their families can bring that about. The stakes really could not be higher for the people of Iraq, for the people of Afghanistan, for the people of this country, or really for the people of the world. Thank you.